Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 26 of the Titanforge podcast. My name is Dratnus. Joining me, as always, is my friend Tettles.
Yo, what's up? We're back.
And my friend Trell.
Howdy, howdy.
Howdy. This week, based on the last week's episode, there's a lot of popularity associated with it. Really happy with the response to it, where we talked about not all the bosses, but a lot of the bosses in BFA dungeons. This week, we're going to continue our Getting Into Mythic Plus series with Trash. But we've only picked out about half the dungeons, so we'll probably do this over 2 episodes, talking about different trash pulls. Next week, we'll do the other half of the dungeons. So this week, if you're interested, we've got Atal'Dazar, Waycrest Manor, King's Rest, Siege of Boralus, and Shrine of the Storm. And we will talk about the trash in those dungeons, the trash pulls, and how to do them, and the things to watch out for in them, the weird little tips and tricks. So that's the thing that we'll get to this week. But first, let's talk a little about what we've been up to the past few days. It is, of course, Push Week. It's the best combination of affixes on the calendar, which has led to us spending a lot of time playing Mythic Plus. You may, in fact, see a slightly shorter episode this week than last week, where we went a little long, because we're all just A, tired from doing keys for the past 4 days, and B, wanting to go back to doing keys for the next 3 days. So, Tettles, how's your Push Week been going?
I mean, I didn't expect to play much, but recently I've been playing with Nerf and Fu a lot, so it's been a ton of fun for me.
That's fantastic. Trell, how are you?
I'm pretty worn out, but yeah, I've been doing lots of keys with several different groups, actually. My team's not always on at the same time, so we haven't really gotten any 25s yet, but hopefully today.
Yeah, so the 25 line was one that we were unsure if it was going to get crossed, and it has been crossed many times this week. It's been crossed 7 or 8 times or something already?
Yeah, to the point where 26 is probably doable in Toldagor.
26 Toldagor, I agree, is the...
Freehold is probably also doable, but fairly challenging. So. But
what do you think about Waycrest Manor, top left with the Prot Warrior?
You'd have to have the Prot Warrior for it.
Yeah.
Dude, did you know that we actually skipped the second woman's cast with a Prot Warrior the other day? We almost skipped the soul manipulation too on a 23.
Yeah, I did a 23 where the soul manipulation cast started below 50%. It was really toxic.
Yeah, that's exactly what we had too.
Yeah. So it's it's a really good, again, Prot Warrior there is the sauce, because that does an extra 7% of the boss's health and damage with the spell reflect. Very, very, very cool. But a lot of groups, of course, pushing with Brewmaster. We've got a couple different comps seeing success there. We've got some Prot Warrior comps, some Brewmaster comps. I think even a Fury Warrior's done a 25 now. Obviously a bunch of rogues, and then Demon Hunters, Mages, Elemental Shaman, all that kind of good stuff that you're used to seeing up there.
Can we get a representation of Moonkin, please? Thank you.
Yeah, waiting on Tettles to skyrocket Moonkin up there. Or has another Moonkin done it? Or is Tettles going to be the one?
I don't know. Unless Andy's gotten one with Sinky, I don't know. Maybe.
I assume so. I didn't check though.
I assume so, probably.
Okay. Anyways, regardless, big congratulations to the world first 25, which came out in Toldagor back on Thursday, from Zamak and Dr. J and those gamers. Yeah, Alliance, King's Honor friend, getting through with the Shadow Meld, although in one of the dungeons where I'd say Shadow Meld is least important compared to some of the others. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that one, Trell. Toldagor.
Yeah, it's probably not as impactful as others, but they do get to skip a whole void that's otherwise necessary. Yeah. Right after the second boss, when you skip up the stairs, they could just meld.
True.
And they could also meld the one by the cannon.
Yeah, which most groups just stay in combat with that or whatever, right? And don't worry too much about it.
Yeah, you live in combat with that thing.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, so Push Week continues. Let's move on to our main topic, but first, let's talk about social media. We are on Twitter at Titanforge WoW, and we have a Discord server. The Discord server will be in the description of the show, wherever you are watching or listening to it. So come check us out there, hang out with us. We talk in that Discord pretty often, although this week, again, we're either asleep or in keys pretty much, so less time to socialize in Discord, I'd say.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know. At least
for me, at least.
Yeah, for me and Trell, I don't know what you've been up to, Tettles. You while you're doing your Moonkin rotation, you can probably just go in there and hang out in Discord. But some of us have complicated gameplay that we have to do. So And we have a Patreon, patreon.com/Titanforge, where you can support the show. And in fact, we are very thankful to the many people who've chosen to do that since last week's episode. That was, in fact, extremely heartwarming to see all the new people up there. So
tons of support.
Yeah, our Patreon or our patrons at the Titanforge socketed or higher level, who earn the reward of being shouted out every week, are Never Nude, Ahara of US Proudmoore, Paul, now also of US Proudmoore, so congrats to those two. King of Skills, VTech, Rock, Zuku, Azza, Ja, Adestria, Falcao, Khalifa D is in, Drunk Swede from League of Lemmings Argent Dawn EU, T Didlow, Actually Tootsie, who says, "Hi, Steve." And I think this is the same person from earlier, right? This is the same name as Tuba, right? So yeah, we're fine. Okay, cool. So thanks to all of you for the support. Appreciate it. Let's move on to our main topic. But first, again, we have another segment that we do first, which is Tip of the Week, where we give you a tip for this week. My tip of the week is that Comp Stomp is going to be the active brawl next week. So the week starting, not the week that you're hearing this if you hear this as soon as it comes out, but the next reset, we're going to have a brawl. It was supposed to be this week, actually. It was supposed to be overlapping with Push Week, but there was some bug, so they pushed it back to next week now, which is great news for anybody who's interested in farming Blood of the Enemy or Sphere of Suppression. Comp Stomp is a easy and fast way to do it. It's not necessarily as fast as like Battleground Bonus Week, but it's way easier than any other way to get your honor. The way this works is you just do an Arathi Basin against bots, and it can take only a couple minutes if you 5-cap them, which you can do pretty reliably, and you get like 300 honor per go. So only 100 of those, and you got your Blood of the Enemy rank 3. It's not too bad compared to, Battlegrounds against people, which you may win or lose, and which have a queue time that's a lot longer. So Comp Stomp, the strategy I'd recommend for this is almost always you should just run for either farm or stables. Go for stables if you're Horde, go for farm if you're Alliance, because you don't want to get them into this spot where they have a base. You want to make sure you get farm or stables before the flag actually turns to theirs. Otherwise, you'll get in the spot where you have 4 bases and they have 1, and you're fighting all 15 of them at that base, and you never can actually take it because they keep respawning, and that makes it take a lot longer. So that's the strategy. It's the speed 5-cap.
Can we take a moment to just analyze that Dratnos said that you only need 100 for Blood of the Enemy rank 3?
Look, Blood of the Enemy is
love essences.
It's a big grind. It's a big grind. At least it's not time gated, right? Like if you want Blood of the Enemy and you want it for a specific date, there's an amount of battlegrounds you can play between now and then that will get you that. That's not true for like Purification Protocol or whatever. So,
sure.
At least there's that going for it. And if you look at the total amount of hours you have to spend on it, it's probably pretty similar to Purification Protocol and and stuff like that. I guess mostly just Purification Protocol being the one that takes a really long time.
Well, Purification Protocol only takes a long time because of the rep. It's not even because of the boxes and the oscillators, dude. You can actually farm the boxes and oscillators in like 4 hours, maybe.
Yeah.
I farmed all the boxes in like 2 hours for null rank 3.
Mm-hmm. And then you just need to wait on Exalted.
Yeah.
Okay, Trell, what is your tip of the week?
My tip of the week this week is knocking the Enchanted Emissary is not really a healer's job in a lot of cases. I think the general public believes that's the case, and it makes sense on paper. But this expansion, the tank takes a lot of damage, even in 15s. And even lower keys in some cases where they're not. And it's probably helpful for a DPS or the tank to use their utility to knock the Enchanted out in a lot of cases. In fact, I can't think of a single instance in higher keys where I actually want my healer to knock it.
Yeah, like maybe throwing out a Vortex in particular is like a really strong global against the Enchanted Emissary. That knocks it like 7 globals worth from another DPS. But outside of that, I think taunts are a really useful thing to cast on it because those are off GCD and knock it. So having your group using those to knock it back is a really useful way to not have it get into the group but not spend actual globals on it.
I do also think it depends on the tank. I think Brewmaster is particularly ill-equipped to allow the healer to knock, whereas something like a Protection Warrior that takes absolutely 0 fucking damage on pull is a little bit better off sometimes.
Yeah, while they're in their avatar. Yeah.
That's true. The Prot Warrior, if there's an Enchanted, there's probably not a Tides, and so they're probably okay for a little bit.
Okay, if there's a Tides, then we're hurting. But
yeah, Outlaw Rogue also very good at this, right? You like if you turn on your Blade Flurry and you throw pistol shots in between the eyes at it, those still cleave onto everything next to you, and they either slow or stun it, which are extra ways to make those very valuable. So an Outlaw Rogue has to do very little to knock this thing. And, you can do the whole thing where you Blade Flurry knock it when it's closer, but then I personally don't like trying to Blade Flurry it with melee attacks, because then it's kind of doing this thing where it's like inching right into the pack and like the whole group is worried about it getting close. I think you should play the Enchanted Emissary where you try not to let it get within like 10 yards of any enemies.
I agree. I do the same thing with Rushing Jadewind when I need to, but it is scary because it dips in and will instantly kill a rogue sometimes.
Yeah, or a fire mage who has ignites on stuff, like
yeah. Dog classes just can't do anything.
Yeah, you ever see the Enchanted Emissary just come in and the fire mage is just like
Instant eyes. Yep, that's exactly how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
I do actually think that is correct, though. Opening up with like a cheap shot from any rogue spec is pretty good, and then of course, like you said, Ursul's Vortex also delays the Enchanted Emissary coming in a large amount. But Ursul's is also really good in other places. I don't know if you really want to Vortex that.
Yeah, if you need it for the pack, obviously you should save it. But some packs you're never going to use. Vortex, right?
Yeah, a lot of times we use Vortex in the Emissary. Like I'll knock it twice. I open with Keg Smash, Breath of Fire, and then I ring it. So that keeps it up for like 5-6 seconds, maybe, depending on what's going on. And then at the end, they Vortex it. And that's like the smallest amount of globals the group needs, if that's ever possible on those kind of pulls. So if you can replicate that in Pugs in some way, that's ideal.
Also, anytime I'm out of combat as an Outlaw Rogue, I'm looking to, if there's an Enchanted Emissary ahead of us, that I can go pull and vanish. And when you do that, you take like 35 to 50 energy off of it, and that can make it, like, that's like stunning it for, 10 seconds when it's actually in. So that's something useful that you can do. All right, Tettles. Looks like you've usurped Tip of the Week here, and you have a new segment for you here. What is this?
Clip of the Week.
Tettles Clip of the Week.
Tettles Clip of the Week? Okay. Is this your plan, just going forward? You're going to change your Tip of the Week to Clip of the Week?
Yeah, that's what we're going to go with.
Love it. Okay.
I'm really excited about this.
Do you want me to play it for stream?
Yeah, you're good to play it whenever.
Okay, here we go. We have Tettles' Clip of the Week here.
I'm zooming in. I'm ready. Wait a minute. It's my Oh no.
So when there are advantages of Overseer Corius taking,
all my gear's about to break.
There are also disadvantages.
There's no way I'm not safe.
Oh, what?
Control getting hit by the crossfire ignition 3 times inside of
Does anyone see
40-second clip is definitely one of them.
And now
then his
gear is broken. Yeah, this is my favorite part of this clip is the gear being broken up here after accepting this rouse. That's the real work of art.
This might be my worst moment ever.
There's no way I'm not safe, he says. Bang.
All right, so yeah, we're gonna.
I was pretty tired. I thought I was in the safe spot, and I wasn't. So.
It looked like you were, yeah. To be fair, beautiful clip. And do we want to? Let's just disperse this real quick to for anybody who wants to see this in Twitch chat. It's there in chat for Tellus' Clip of the Week. Okay, so without further ado, we are going to start off our dungeon pathing and trash tips with Atal'Dazar. So. Tettles, what's the first kind of notable trash that you run into in Atal'Dazar?
I think the Augurs and the Confessors with that 6-pack is pretty commonly done. It also has like Juggernauts and Honor Guards inside of it. I think that the way that people deal with that a lot of the times is a bit cumbersome, and they don't understand why groups are doing it, and they end up wiping just due to kicks on the Augurs and the Confessor. So I think that's when we really want to go through what is important with this trash pack. So I guess we can start off with like the snap spots. I would say that that's the most pivotal part of this. Keeping the Juggernauts in place allows for the pull to go significantly smoother.
Yeah, so the reason we use the snap spot, and here's some video. In fact, yeah, we can take a look at this full screen. The reason you'll stand on top of the stairs up here is so that nobody is in melee or everybody is in melee of the Juggernaut or in a snap spot. And by doing that, the Juggernaut will not charge. So sometimes you see groups send somebody up to the snap spot and then somebody else is standing outside of the group and just getting charged at anyways. That's a really catastrophic thing to have happen. But here's this clip from Tettles' stream of how to use this thing. Somebody gets up to that snap spot, everybody else is in melee of the Juggernaut, and now the Juggernaut will not charge because somebody is no path available, the only person at range. And that...
Ooh.
Yeah.
Also in that clip, there was a mistake, and Tettles handled it really well, where he hopped off to dodge the fire enchant and then hopped right back on before it charged. That was really good.
Dying to the fire enchant. I'd rather get hit by the Juggernaut than die to that.
Yeah, fire enchant going off. It got 2 ticks there. That's a lot. That's a lot of ticks for fire enchant, but You guys survived. Very, very good. Very impressive. Yeah, it is worth noting that there is a Tides Emissary in this pull on 2 out of the 3 weeks, but on Enchanted Week there is not. So that's part of the reason that Enchanted is such a good week in Atal'Dazar, is that there's no Tides Emissary you have to deal with if you want to pull all 6 of these mobs at the same time. Okay, so yeah, that's a good way to bait the Juggernaut so that it doesn't charge on you. Outside of that, just kicking every Wildfire on the Augur. The Fiery Enchant you can interrupt with something that's not a kick, like a Shockwave or whatever, so you can save something like that for that cast.
Which you should definitely do, because there's already 4 required kicks in that pool, and that's typically how many kicks you have. And if you have a ranged player, that makes it even harder to do that. So always try to disrupt that Mending Word with something else besides.
Yeah, and we're going to open up our show notes document for this week also, and probably for next week too, and maybe the week after, because we've just got so many different clips to link in here. So if you're interested in following along, you can find all of the associated clips and videos and images and stuff in our show notes document, which will be linked in the description, rather than us trying to put 50 links in our description. Okay, so that's the first pull with Juggernauts. There are more pulls with Juggernauts throughout the dungeon, and again, you need to make sure that you're either in melee of them or in a spot where you're safe from them, or that you're just aware. If you're far at range of them, sometimes it can be right to pull these things with somebody who's not in like a snap spot and just dodging them, but you have to be aware of it. Another thing to be aware of as well is that Juggernauts will charge to pets. So if you have like a Fire Elemental, a Magus of the Dead, if you're playing with an Unholy Death Knight, those will bait the Juggernaut charges onto them, which can be really problematic because they can be like 7 yards away from the group, and then some people in the group can still be getting hit by them on those charges. So be really careful of where those pets are.
Brewmaster Statue, you could bait it out with that if you take that talent. I'd recommend Ring of Peace, but if you like that talent, it works.
Yeah, if you're using it for skittish reasons or something.
I didn't realize that, but that makes sense because I saw Petko summoning his Storm Ellie out of range, and he was like really far whenever he summoned it. I was like, why did he just do that? But now it makes more sense.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other spots. We saw that one spot in Tettles' clip. We have some other spots where one can stand to bait a Juggernaut. This is up on the left-hand side of the stairs after the Colossus pull or whatever. There's this little potted plant where one can stand to bait the Juggernaut in that pull. So if you're going into that pull and fighting it unironically, this is a spot you might be interested in. You can also go and snap it back to where we fought that first 6-pack, right? That's another option that is allowed. So those are 2 different places to handle this Juggernaut. Here
that being said,
before
you move on to the next one, all those Juggernaut pulls, if they include an Honor Guard, which is only the first 6 pull has the Honor Guards, the tank cannot snap them to the snap spots. Range has to be in the snap spot for that first 6 pull, just because the Honor Guards just don't let the tank do it for whatever reason. But every other pull, the tank can snap the mobs into a snap spot and keep them there, which is probably the play for Vulcan.
Okay, we have now another snap spot at the top of the stairs here on Priestess Alunza's side. This is a location. So for our audio listeners, there's like, the fire staircase. There is a way that you can jump next to the little fires at the top of it that counts as a snap spot. It's weird because you kind of don't like actually jump onto it like most snap spots. But here we can watch Tettles getting there, so you can see the little process by going into this. So you just walk around here and you kind of run into this invisible wall, and then by running along the side, you get past that invisible wall, and now mobs are not going to be able to charge at you when you're back here. And that is a really useful place to go.
You can also like wild charge or like disengage.
Yeah, you can jump and use some displacement ability to get there. And let's see. And then finally, we have one more snap spot available that we use pretty often here, actually. If you're going to engage the Juggernaut Augur, sometimes groups do this with like the 2 priestesses at the top of the stairs after the Colossus pull and stuff. Tettles, did you solo all these mobs in this Mythic 0?
It's a normal.
Mike, oh, normal, okay. You're insane. All right, so...
Very powerful.
What a legend. What a legend.
I should have said yes.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, this little brazier up here is one that you can jump onto as well. You may have some difficulties getting onto it at first, but you kind of just climb up it slowly, and then when you're standing up here, you're going to be not chargeable also. It's a very useful thing. Again, these spots are all kind of spooky with Volcanic active. This week in particular, those spots can get you into trouble with Volcanic, so be careful of that. But Yeah, it's worthwhile to stop the Juggernaut charges from going out. Even if you wouldn't take damage from dart charging Juggernauts normally, the fact that it like pulls them out of the group can really offset their health from everything else. So it's really nice to have them just not move.
Yeah, you can also displace the Juggernauts like with like if you use like a movement ability while they're charging, it also stops them. Or if somebody with a stun or like a gouge can hit them mid charge, it will instantly cancel it. Nerf, very powerful, and actually would shockwave it mid charge somehow. Kept it in the melee pack, well, because basically this week you just can't get up in snap spot, dying to volcanic. Not really cool.
Although it is worth noting, I at times I've like gouged this thing while it's been charging, and then when it comes out of the gouge, it like does the AoE just where it's standing still. Sometimes I don't know if you guys have seen that.
I've seen it do the effect, but I didn't know it actually did the AoE.
I've definitely taken damage from it
both ways,
from mid charge stuns. I don't exactly know how, like what causes that versus when it will not do damage. Maybe that's been fixed as well. But yeah, it's definitely something to keep in mind, at least of ways you can do it. Okay. Looks like it might be based on whether it's a stun or like a long CC. All right, let's talk about so we've talked about Augurs and Confessors a little bit. Augurs need to be kicked on basically every wildfire on fortified weeks, and even on non-fortified weeks. Whereas Confessors have a slightly different kit, right? So Confessors have Mending Ward and Bwonsambi's Mantle, which behave a little differently from each other. Mending Ward can be interrupted with a gouge or a stun or anything, and it won't recast, whereas Bwonsambi's Mantle requires a kick. If you stop them with a stun or whatever, they will recast Bwonsambi's Mantle when they come out of their stun. So a common strategy for dealing with a Confessor is for an Outlaw Rogue to take it, because an Outlaw Rogue can generally gouge every Mending Ward and kick every Bwonsambi's Mantle. And if your gouge is for some reason unavailable on Mending Ward, if it does a weird spell queue, you have options with various stuns, blinds, and the like to stop it from going through there. Confessors do also have a Dispel ability. Trell, what does Confessors Dispel, and is it ever relevant to the group?
Yeah, well, it was really relevant in Season 1 with Infested, where they would just, you CC the Infested in the pool, and then the mob would instantly Dispel the Infested and ruin all your plans. So you have to pull it like way out of range and keep it away from it to be able to just stop it completely. These days, we don't really have to worry about it too much. Is there an instance lately we've had to do that?
Yeah, it doesn't really come up all that much. Like, I don't even know if it'll dispel tides that are affected.
It'll dispel tides that are rooted.
So that's the case where it'll be a pain then, is it, if you're planning to chain root tides, right? Getting that dispelled will suck. But outside of that,
yeah, that's true. I guess I haven't noticed it because I ring out the tides as a brewmaster, but other tanks would definitely have to struggle with that and probably plan to kick for dispel or pull it out of range.
Mm-hmm. Or I mean, just reroute over it, right? You just, because I think dispel has a cooldown. Okay, so that's the Confessors. Let's talk a little bit about Toxic Swords. So Toxic Swords do this like AoE jump where they'll jump on somebody and do heavy damage to them, and also anybody close to them. So you kind of, like, you would normally want to stack, right, for swords, so that you could be easily healed, but you can't because it's an AoE jump. So what we found in High Keys is that swords are just one of the most deadly things to a group in the instance, and we've instead started to use snap spots for the past year to stop them from actually doing damage to everybody. So the way this works is your tank goes and stands on one of these snap spots. There are a lot of them throughout the middle of the dungeon. These are the most common ones, where you just kind of get on the little pillars at the side. And then if your tank is standing up here and has threat on the swords, they'll all snap and just immediately stand on top of him or her, and then be unable to jump on anybody else.
Side note, your melee cannot stand on this snap spot with your tank, otherwise the Sards will begin to leap and insta-kill your tank, probably.
Yeah,
yes,
that's true. And also worth noting, the moment the tank gets into the snap spot, people need to be in combat with the tank so that they attempt to leap at the other players instead of just solo leaping on the tank. Because if you're the only one in combat and you go there, they'll leap to you anyway and they'll just kill you. It's pretty complex.
And if you rip threat on these things, they'll snap back out to whoever ripped threat, and then you have them outside again on the main walkway, and that's a bad thing also. But if done correctly, you can snap multiple packs at once to your tank. One way to do this is Tricks of the Trade. Rogues using Tricks of the Trade and then hitting a sword and then either vanishing or just hitting all the swords with a Blade Flurry attack. They'll all just teleport to the tank. So you can use this to get multiple pulls onto your tank at the same time. And this fixes the thing with multiple people being in combat with the tank, because then your rogue will also be in combat with them at the start there. So very, very useful thing there. In addition to these snap spots at the side, there are also snap spots on the stairs of both sides, going up to the staircases on both sides. Tanks can get up to this little decorative bit on the side of the stairs, decorative banister thing, and by standing on those, that's also a snap spot. And those are pretty useful depending on where emissaries are, to snap the first couple of Saurid pulls as you come down the stairs. On whichever side of the stairs you come down, there's one of these that's useful.
I like those a lot. Transcending to those or getting tricks to those is really nice because, for one, they're out of range of the void that spawns in the middle of the Atal'Dazar bridge, whatever it's called. And so if you bring it back there and you accidentally aggro the void for whatever reason, the party's still safe until you kill the Sar.
Yeah, I mean,
it's also just close to where you open the gate up. It's easy to get to.
And aggroing that void is something that you kind of have to do if you're not playing a Brewmaster group. That's like the Brewmaster is what lets you not aggro that void, but usually you will aggro that void in other groups and have to just outrange it. And this is a spot that does that this week. So yeah, very very good spot. And a fairly easy one to jump to. Like, there's not a risk of falling down to Razan's room like there is on all the other jump spots, which, like, we don't talk about it, but it does happen. It does happen that you fall down from there. Okay.
All the time, actually.
Yeah. Then outside of that, we have some other strange pulls in this dungeon. We have some, different ones that sometimes get pulled and sometimes don't. So let's talk about when to pull versus not pull. I'd say there's 3 different, like, pulls of which you generally have to pick 0 to 1. You either do all the other trash in the dungeon, or you can do one of these hard pulls. The first one is the middle pack. So, Tettles, when does one pull the middle pack with the Dinomancer and stuff?
I think the only time that's actually doable is like on a teaming week. I think that's probably the only reasonable time that you would be looking to do that. In addition to that, the Dinomancer on fortified weeks, the shot hits abnormally hard, but it can be lined. So if you're pretty quick with it, it can be okay. Not super applicable to anything below like a 21 though for getting one shot by the Dinomancer shot.
Yeah, it's more of a high key problem. You can snap this middle pack as well, but it's that comes with its own host of problems and difficulties for your tank.
Snapping is absolutely preferred.
Yeah,
just because the middle pack does actually have Sarids associated with it, but it does require your tank to be able to face tank the middle pack for upwards of probably like a minute and a half.
Yeah,
because you're going to have the 2 dinosaurs and the Dinomancer like right on top.
You have to take the Thrash, which is the problem with there. The Thrash does a lot of damage, but it also allows your team to LOS the shots from the Dinomancer, and the charge just doesn't go off because the dinosaurs snapped, and the Asars don't leap either. So it's a very good benefit for the group. Kind of a hardship for the tank.
So then we have the Colossus pulls on the left side. There's 2 different Colossus pulls. Groups will generally only pull the one that's like in the way and leave the one that's you can skip by walking around it. But sometimes groups will either skip or pull that Colossus pack. Trell, when do you choose to pull that Colossus pack versus skipping it?
Like 6 weeks ago when it was another good fort week. That sounds so bad to say. 6 weeks was the last good fort week. Yeah. When we'd push keys. But at that point in time, we did pull the Colossus and some other ridiculous mobs in these dungeons. And I don't think it's the play at all anymore unless it's teaming, like Tuttle said, when you need extra mob count that you can't get anywhere else. They're just really dangerous. If you have a good way to skip them without losing a large amount of time, I think you should do it. It's hard to do for the count.
My experience with Colossus pulls is that they're a pretty high failure rate pull, and like if they target the wrong person with their eye beam thing, it's that person can just die and have like very very little recourse. Whereas if it targets like only rogues or whatever, then it feels great and it's a pull that looks really smart. But I don't think taking that chance is worthwhile generally, and you usually don't need to do it to time the key.
Agreed.
And then the other pull that has gone out of favor since season 1, when we used to always do one, was an honor guard pull. And we're not talking about the Dazara honor guard, we're talking about the reanimated honor guard. So these are ones that do large amounts of damage. Oh, Trell, you're a green screen now.
Yes, he is.
Man, that's okay.
Hang on.
Continuing on.
Yeah, continuing on, Tettles. When does one pull a reanimated honor guard pack? And what are the difference between them?
I think that this is probably the most common. I would say that this is still one of the meta strategies for whenever you're pugging keys, pulling these reanimated honor guards. At least 1 or 2 of these packs.
The first one on the right, yeah.
Yeah, the first one on the right is probably the most doable. And the reason for that is because you're only doing it with the Stalker. There's also potentially a Void there on some weeks as well. But Most of the time, it's just a stalker with the honor guard. You can just kill the totem, nuke down the honor guard. Your tank can also. He should be looking to not get too many stacks of the bleed, but if you have enough priority damage, he probably should be okay. It refreshes the bleed every 15 seconds, right?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something you do not want to get multiple stacks of. Yeah, and you really generally don't want to pull any of the other reanimated honor guard packs, like the ones with witch doctors or the double honor guard pack. That's basically always a skip. And we'll talk more about the ways to do these different skips in 2 weeks. We're going to do an episode all about skips, but this week we're mostly just talking about the actual trash mechanics. So
yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the tank meta and the effects of the different mechanics in Atal'Dazar. So, Tattles, what's kind of the high level takeaway you'd have from all the trash mobs in Atal'Dazar and what they cause your tank to want to do?
If your tank kites, then people die.
Yeah, so anytime you're on a snap spot, right, you can't kite, and anytime you're fighting like Dazari Honor Guard, Dazari Shield Bearer, all these mobs have random reanimated Honor Guard. They have random abilities that will target the closest person if their tank isn't in melee. And so if you kite, people are just going to die to getting shield bashed or rending mauled or fervent striked, and that happens all the time if you try to kite. So basically, you can't kite in this dungeon on most pulls. Like, there's not a good way to do it.
It's very unintuitive. This is like the staple of Battle for Azeroth, where they introduced this mechanic of when the tank kites, the mobs cast their tank quote-unquote abilities on the nearest target. And they added that because in Legion, everyone would just kite every pull max range and just make them not do anything and just follow them slowly with big Warlock slows. So this mechanic is kind of aggravating to me for the entire expansion, because they also still have mandatory kiting affixes in the game, such as Necrotic. And so Necrotic makes you kite, and then your melee DPS die. And they just have to be so aware of how that works, and it's not explained in any way from the mobs themselves. You have to have prior knowledge of how that works. But anyway, it's just something to be aware of.
Like, experienced rogues or whatever, or demon hunters can parry or blade dance or whatever as they get these shield bashes on them. But if you're playing with people who don't know exactly how to do that, people are going to die when you start to kite, and that is really tragic. So something to be aware of in Atal'Dazar for sure. Okay, let's move on to Waycrest Manor. And Waycrest Manor, a big determinant of how good your run is going to be is which doors open at the start of the dungeon. So we've got 3 of them. Daddles, which of the doors is good?
Top left and bottom right are both okay. I would say that top left is more advantageous than bottom right, just because of purely based on the fact that you can get a Bloodlust on the Heartsbane Triad instantly and know if your run is dead or not. But
yeah,
bottom right also has like some innate advantages of being able to get count a little bit easier. Of course, you can pull the hallway back into the hunting lodge, and you have more space. Top right has a plethora of issues just because you're automatically overcount the way that in which you get to Triad. Basically, on the opposite side of the room, you have to go up the stairs and like through this like Raven area to get to Triad.
Yeah, it's really catastrophic. So, like you have to deal with extra mobs on both sides of the dungeon if you get the top right door at the start. It sucks. It's a really awful door to have open, and you get way more witch spawns as well that you have to deal with, and you have to like fight that maggot hallway without pulling it back somewhere, because usually you won't clear the Huntsman's Lodge. So that all is bad if you get top right, but it's still doable. I did Waycrest like twice this week, and both were top right and timed it both times, so it's definitely doable, but it's not as good as the other doors. Okay, we also have various locations in the dungeon where witches can spawn. All sorts of different places where witches can theoretically spawn. On different weeks, some of them are active and some of them aren't. But the big news is that sometimes there are 3 different types of witch, and they're vastly different in how hard they are to kill. So Trell, what is the easiest to hardest of the witch types?
The easiest is by far the Rune Weaver, and sometimes the witch spawns are consistently Rune Weavers. I think the one upstairs on the left is always a Rune Weaver.
Yeah, the first top left one. Sure. Yeah.
Mostly their witch spawns are RNG. They can either be the Rune Weaver, the Soul Charmer, or the Vine Twister. Vine Twister is by far the hardest. They require 2 melee kicks, I think, dedicated to them. So the 2 or 1. I'm pretty sure it's. And if those
I think one shaman can do it, but outside of that, it's 2 melee kicks.
Yes, yeah. That's right. If those casts go off, your healer gets stunned, I believe, and your tank's probably going to die because the Vine Twister also does magic damage on their auto attacks. Which is really something nice to see, like the Tides Emissary.
Yeah.
It's very sarcasm, by the way.
So yeah, the Vine Twister definitely the hardest, and then the Soul Charmer kind of in the middle ground. Does need some kicks, but not as many.
You can either roll a nice rune carver, or you can Titanforge by the podcast name a Vine Twister and have a really hard.
Yeah, that's the terminology for when you get a Vine Twister is Titanforging one. There are some pulls that are really ugly if a Vine Twister gets added to them, and then you like it's the most important to kick, and also it murders your tank. Whereas Runeweaver, like the Runeweaver does so little tank damage, and it also does this like etch cast that does no damage to whoever's being targeted, basically, and you can just let it cast forever. The only thing to care about on Runeweavers is to make sure you're not hitting everybody with the frontal cleave, right? All right.
Yes.
By the way, let the channel go on the Runeweaver, which the etch channel is less damage than the auto attacks. That's something I forgot to mention.
Yep. So definitely don't kick etch. It's not a good use of a kick unless it's targeting somebody who's about to die. Don't kick it because your tank is about to die. Okay. Then outside of witches, we have maggots to talk about. Maggots are interesting because sometimes they cast Infest and sometimes they won't. And you can actually tell which maggots will cast Infest because they'll have a debuff called Parasitic on them. You do not want Infest cast to go off. Infests can be stopped with either interrupts or stuns or whatever, so you can AoE stun as soon as you start seeing cast, or you can get add-ons that will either put the Parasitic thing on their nameplate, so there's a weak aura for that, for instance, that we've found. We're not actually 100% sure if it works, because most of us just have nameplate add-ons that do this. Plater, for instance, will put Parasitic in pretty big place on them, and there are auto-marker weak auras you can find. Auto-marker weak auras that will automatically mark whichever maggots in the pool have the Parasitic debuff, and then you can, then you can focus those or whatever and be ready to kick them. So it's important to not let that Infest go off, because then you'll lose count. That's one of the drawbacks to this, is that if it does cast Infest, you'll have to deal with 2 maggots when the Infest ends, and you won't get count from either of them. So that's a drawback. Tettles,
Man, our Twitch chat is really distracting today. Twitch chat is banned.
Yeah, Tettles, you doing okay over there?
I'm absolutely okay. I'm just fucking dying.
Okay. That's the maggots. Let's talk about Gorgers and Snapspots. So, Snapspot's something you mostly hear about in Atal'Dazar, but we also have Snapspots in Waycrest Manor. Trell, how do Snapspots work in this place, and what's the point of them against Gorgers?
Yeah, they're just like the Juggernauts in Atal'Dazar. You want the ranged player or the healer to stand in the snap spot, or you can't put the tank there because they don't actually snap. But the healer or the range want to stand on those little like chest of drawer things in the hallway. Yeah, Tettles is on it in that screenshot. And they choose the farthest target at the time that they cast the leap. So if the ranged player is there and they're the farthest person in the party, then they'll just do nothing and continue to attack the tank.
Yeah, because the Gorgers leap on the farthest person and do like an AoE bleed when they land. And that can do a lot of damage. So it's not like the Juggernauts where nobody else can be at range. Like other people can be at range, just the farthest person has to be on a snap spot.
Right.
So we have this chest of drawers in the hallway. We have this little bench or upturned table in Rawl the Gluttonous's room. Although this one's not used very often. People generally don't fight things in Rawl's room unless they're, some roots do, but usually this is not something that'll happen. Generally, instead, the Gorgers in that room will get pulled out to the courtyard. And then Tettles, the elite druid, can stand in the fountain here. And that is a great snap spot against this, just jumping up into the fountain. And then your Gorgers aren't going to hit you, and you have a lot of room to, like, even on Volcanic Week, you can stand up here because you can dodge volcanoes up in here. All right.
Sounds about right.
Speaking of the courtyard, one of my favorite things about the courtyard in Waycrest is that you can pull to the courtyard and then clear the courtyard and then start pulling trash to the courtyard. And it's a nice wide open area, so I'd recommend that strategy for doing Waycrest. One thing about the courtyard is that there are lightning strikes randomly throughout the courtyard that will then set patches of the ground on fire. And that fire is useful, actually. It does damage to the enemies that are in the courtyard. So any enemy that spawns in the courtyard will take damage if it stands in the fire. So that includes like Matron Brindle and every single enemy that spawns in the courtyard. But anything you pull from the hallways does not take damage from the fires. So don't worry about trying to put those in the fire, right?
Correct. Yep.
And generally, the way to do these fires is just the most recent one that spawned is a really good one to try and run to, because that one will be around for a while. And then just plant the mobs in it, and they'll take a lot of extra damage. Especially the bigger health mobs like Matron Brindle, really valuable to put into a fire. Okay. Outside of that, when we're in the courtyard, we have to fight the Thorn Shapers. Thorn Shapers is a mob that you only have to fight in the courtyard in the cellar, I think. Tettles, what's the deal with Thorn Shapers?
Oh, okay. So basically, some casts on the Thorn Shaper should be kicked the whole entire time. Reconstruction can be kicked marginally. It depends on what the mobs with the Thorn Shapers are. If you have a Thorn Guard, or if you have any of the hounds, then the reconstruction will heal them to full. If it's just the Thorn Shapers, then the reconstruction won't heal. So sometimes you need to kick those. Soul Fetish, of course, will give a mob like a debuff that whenever it dies, it gives other mobs a 5 buff that can be purged off. And
I think it's attacks. I think it's
like haste and
20%
damage,
and haste per stack. It's a lot of haste and damage too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they rolled a 5 buff, and then they beat your tank's ass. And then Affected Thorn, which can be dispelled. I think it's a disease, right?
It is a disease, yeah.
So it can be dispelled, but by and large, like the Soul Fetish and the Infected Thorn should be kicked.
Yeah, so it depends, right?
There's occasionally 3 kicks that are required on this mob.
Like, Reconstruction is a mandatory kick when you're fighting a lot of hounds that need to die or whatever. Or if you're fighting these with a Thorn Guard. Otherwise, it's completely unimportant, and you don't need to let it through. And you don't need to kick it. Soul Fetish, like, sometimes it matters, but if the Thorn Shaper is going to be the last thing to die, it doesn't matter so much. Or if you have a lot of purges in your group, it also doesn't matter as much. And then Infected Thorn, you want to kick as much as possible outside of that. But this is a really cool mob because the priority of those kicks changes based on what's going on. And it's not just like the same always. You have to actually think about which ones need to be kicked based on what you're pulling with the Thorn Shapers. It's also worth noting they have an Uproot cast, which is not kickable, but it is gougeable and stuff. So if you want to gouge it or stun it on the Uproots, that'll stop somebody from getting knocked back, and that can be really helpful for your healer or for whoever's being targeted.
I'm actually kind of surprised that these mobs are CCable, I'll be honest.
Yeah, they don't look like... They're the same model as the unCCable witches that are throughout the dungeon.
It's a good thing they're CCable. They do have 4 casts on one mob, and they rotate the abilities every time they cast. And it's a lot to take in. Like, someone coming to this expansion for the first time after, say, Legion will see this mob and be like, what? This mob has 4 different abilities that need to be stopped or interrupted. Whereas Legion, some mobs had 0 to 1 abilities that they had to.
Shout out BFA.
Yeah,
shout out BFA.
Yeah, it's more mechanics than most pulls in Legion had going on a single mob. All right, outside of that, the rest of the dungeon, there are some matrons that are tough mini bosses to fight. But the next trash mobs that we really want to cover are the Gloom Horrors. So these are down after you kill Lord and Lady Waycrest. You'll need to engage maybe 7 Gloom Horrors. You might skip some number of these. You might only have to fight 5 or 3 or 4 or whatever, some weird number. But the Gloom Horrors in particular, these are ones that you'll also want somebody on a snap spot for, right? They behave pretty similarly to Gorgers. So Tettles, what's the strategy for these Gloom Horrors?
Okay, so similar to the Juggernauts and similar to the Gorgers, you actually want to be in a snap spot, and there's 2 different snap spots that a lot of people will use. One of them is in like a door frame, like right as you walk in, and the other one's on top of one of the pillars.
So here's a clip of that door frame thing that you can stand up on, and now nothing will get to you. This is a good one for this week as well because it's volcanic, and so you're immune to volcanoes up here in this little door frame. Or the other one is this little obelisk thing that you run up the stairs and then you gotta jump here onto this little obelisk. It's a little easier if you have flap or something, but even without it, you can jump on there, and then they will also not jump onto you. But volcanic can hit you up here, and you can't really dodge it. So that's a
notice the vortex.
Spot.
The vortex is dropped right as they come around the corner up there. They're going to instantly cast leap on the farthest target and probably one shot the person if there's not some kind of stop on it. Like that vortex will stop them and pull them back in. I use Ring of Peace as a brewmaster. If you have any kind of knock like that in the group, you can knock them midair if you're really sick. If you're the farthest person, if you don't have any stops like that, if you're the tank, say up there, you can actually skystep and just dodge the leap if you're going maximum speed. perpendicular to where the leap's coming in. That's like the last resort, but that is possible.
Yeah, it does a lot of damage, those leaps do. So the Vortex, very, very, very useful there, stopping them from doing that. Okay, that pack is definitely dangerous, but it's also a lot of count, and it's a nice way to handle those. Okay, can you parry it as furthest target? I think it's magic damage. I don't think it's parryable. I think it's cloakable.
Yeah, that's definitely magic damage.
Cloakable, but not parryable. So that's a way to handle that also, I guess, is a rogue running out there and cloaking far. Or just a rogue can run out and feint and not die because it's AoE damage, and feint is very, very overpowered. Okay, that's Waycrest Manor. Let's move on to King's Rest. King's Rest has a bunch of trash, and one of the problems with King's Rest is you basically have to do... Like, you can skip a couple of things throughout the dungeon, but there's not much to skip. You can't... Because it's so linear, you basically have to pull, like, most of the stuff in here. Starting off, we have the Animated Guardians. These used to be something that we would skip, but they buffed the amount of enemy forces they give to them, and that makes it so that almost always it's efficient to pull Animated Guardians. They give 8 count each now instead of 5, which is a lot better.
It's the same count as Shadow of Zul, by the way.
Yep, they give each Animated Guardian same count and difficulty as Shadow of Zul. Or
cool, very cool. Thank you, Battle for Azeroth. Thank you.
They give like 2 Void Touched Emissaries, right? 2 Void Touched Emissaries worth of count. Each Animated Guardian.
Oh, very fair.
Very fair. Very, very cool and balanced. So, what is going on with these Animated Guardians, Trell? What are the abilities you have to watch? And here, we'll just watch this clip of you fighting them as well while you explain.
Oh yeah. Hopefully this isn't one where I die to them. So at this point in the expansion, they only target the tank with their frontal cleave, and so you want to slowly rotate them in a semicircle the opposite direction of your range and healer and your melee, obviously, but the melee are more mobile, they can go wherever. So you see me like slowly turning and just making sure I'm not in the cleave, because it will one-shot me as well.
Yeah,
but after the initial gather, this is what you do.
These enemies have deceiving ground effects. They'll do a small ground effect where they're aiming, and then after they hit the ground, there will be this big lightning effect on the ground that doesn't actually do anything. That's a bait. People see this and think, oh, I can't stand in there, and then they die because they stand in where the next one's going to hit, the smaller ground effect, but that's actually not how it works. So you just have to watch. It's just a one-shot ability, the frontal clone, so just don't be in it when they finish their slam cast, and then you're fine. And yeah, it's always aimed at the tank these days, which is really nice. It used to aim at random people, and that could be a lot more annoying, but now that it's always aimed at the tank, these are pretty easy to deal with, so we usually do try to pull 4 of these at once, depending on where the emissaries are, and maybe fire up a Bloodlust right at the front. Okay, outside of that, we have the Serpent Room. The Serpent Room, the main things to worry about are kicks on Witch Doctors, just kicking every cast on them, so try to do that. If you have a warrior working in Spell Reflect for the Deathly Chills, also very good, but try not to pull more than one Witch Doctor at once unless you're doing the MDI. But there are ways to pull these packs without the emissaries that are in them, and that I think is one of the most useful things to do, even if you don't have a Ring of Peace. So here we have footage from Trell's stream again of how to pull in King's Rest without getting the Enchanted Emissary in this 4-pack at the side here. So you'll see if you target that warrior right there, and then you make sure you stand in a spot where the Witch Doctor cannot start casting on you, then the pack will come and the emissary will not. If you pull this in line of sight of the Witch Doctor, this will not work, because the Witch Doctor will stand still and will cast, and that will proxy aggro the emissary, so you do have to be careful of that. That's a way to get
I hugged the wall there like instantly right after I tag it, just for that reason.
Yeah.
Did you know that for some character models that won't even be enough, that you actually have to get behind that little fire goblet thing that will line of sight you? But that's especially important whenever there's a void inside of that room. Some character models, including High Mountain Tauren, will have to stand behind that door.
If you're a High Mountain Druid, at least you can go cat form if you need to LOS at a certain moment and you have a smaller hitbox. But that is something you have to be aware of, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's one of the upsides actually of playing a Goblin, if you're ever interested, is you get a bunch of extra free line of sight spots throughout the dungeon. But you also have some weird puddles that you swim in. I don't know if you know that there's a Siege of Boralus in Hadal's room around that little fountain. There's spots where goblins swim and everybody else can stand. So it cuts both ways.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Okay, we also have, in addition to that pull, there's the Tides pull, at the that can be like in the champion witch doctor side in the first room, and that can also be pulled without the emissary, right? So the strategy here is to tag that champion and then immediately get out of range and get far to the right so that they don't run at all next to the tides. And by doing this, even without a ring of peace, you can avoid pulling the emissary of the tides here. Transcendence helps, but Heroic Leap would do this also. Would get you to that spot where the mobs then run. And again, the main thing is you need to make sure the Witch Doctor does not cast on you while it's next to the Emissary of the Tides, because then it will be there for long enough to proxy the Emissary of the Tides. But a useful tip there for handling that room is basically you never want to fight emissaries with these things. Just deal with an emissary with the boss if it's fortified. If it's tyrannical, I don't know when you're supposed to deal with them. It's maybe also on pull, but it can be a little scarier.
The reality is tides do so much damage, and they're often placed in these packs in these dungeons where they're with another high tank damage mob that needs to be kicked pretty much to live. And so even on like 15s and below, I would still LOS it. I would not just brute force the tides with a Witch Doctor and KR.
Yeah, I mean, if your Witch Doctor's free casting, that's gonna kill you even on a 15. Yeah, that's a lot of damage. So I agree that's not something that we like to do.
Intentionally placed, by the way.
Yeah, cleverly placed by Blizzard Design. I mean, part of the problem is just that King's Rest is so much damage on those mobs. Like,
dude, not even King's Rest. Think about like where all the emissaries are placed just in normal dungeons. They're so bad.
True.
Why is there a void emissary after the gauntlet this week? It's just a void emissary.
Yeah,
just sitting there.
The Loktar Ogar
on your timer.
The one that only Horde has to kill and Alliance could just easily meld. Yeah, that's a great one. The solo void emissary that there's like no way to pull anything onto even.
So stupid.
Okay. After you get through that, though, you'll get into Machimba's room, and there's a bunch of oozes that we're not going to talk about, but there are internment constructs. Tettles, how do internment constructs work in Machimba's room?
So actually, they put you in the nearest little sarcophagus. I was looking. Yeah, I was looking for the word for it.
That works.
Yeah, so the nearest coffin, I guess, is what we'll use whenever they actually do cast that ability. And you can actually pull both these internment constructs at once and be okay. But if you actually desync their cast improperly, then you'll be effed. So the most notable strategy for it is you grab one of them on the far side of the room, and your group as a whole moves to the other one. As soon as the first person gets put in the coffin, then you let them out and then you pull the other internment construct at the exact same time. And that'll make sure that they're desynced enough to where you don't get them overlapping, because actually if they overlap, you can be stuck in limbo where you can never get out.
Yeah, and another strategy is if they're overlapped, you just make sure that you go into different coffins, because it puts you in the closest coffin to you, not to the construct. So you can just have whoever gets targeted first go into one coffin, and whoever gets targeted second jump to the other coffin and go into that. So that's a strategy that also works on those enemies. But yeah, if they try to put you in the same coffin back to back close enough, then you get locked into the whale, and that can be a big problem.
Also, just a random tip, we found recently that if you tank the two constructs far enough away from where the people get popped out of the sarcophagi at, they get to re-stealth or second pot the mid-pull. They just drop combat once you get out of the sarcophagus.
Yeah, that's
help your assassination rogue if they're one of two players that still play assassinations.
Yeah, you can drop combat, which is really like you're not in combat when you come out of those coffins unless the enemies are within combat range of you, in which case you'll jump out in combat. Okay, let's talk about the bridge after Machimba. Trell, how do you handle the Berserker stacks, the Berserker bleeds on this part?
This is probably the most important mob on the bridge, and it's the most non-intuitive. Like the Hex Priest you can kick, the Witch Doctors you can kind of tell what's going on. They summon the totem and you kill it. But the Berserkers just cast a bleed like every 8 seconds. I can't remember the time on the top of my head, but maybe every 8 seconds.
Yeah.
They cast a really nasty bleed on the highest threat player if they're in range. And it's something like an 8-yard range. They melee like a 5-yard range, but the bleed is an 8-yard range. And so if you're anywhere within that radius of the mob, you're getting the bleed. You have a chance to parry or dodge it if you're either one of those kinds of tanks. And if you get the first bleed, you're usually okay. I usually call for Bark, or I use Dampen or Fort and take the bleed. But then when I know the second bleed is going to come, I will get out of the group and have someone else take it, or I'll have the Boomkin cast trees, And you can replicate that with any kind of ability that puts a unit on the Berserker.
You can stun. You can actually stun the Berserker till... Okay, so basically the overlap is only 2 seconds on whenever it's going to cast the bleed versus whenever
Right. Okay, yeah,
your bleed is falling
right.
off.
It's like an 8.5 second recast and a 10-second bleed or something. So
Yeah, I think
you have
that's
a
right.
nice little overlap of where you'll get multiple stacks on a single Berserker, and if you keep it CC'd during that overlap, then you're gonna drop stacks and only ever be tanking one. But yeah, another thing is that they will. If your tank is out of range, they will hit the closest person if anybody is within 8 yards.
Or pets,
or
including
pets.
water elemental
Or totem.
Or hunter pet.
You can just put an earth grab or earthbind totem next to it if nobody else is next to it, and it will
Can you
slay.
actually?
Yes, that's allowed.
Yeah. Totems and this Brewmaster statue, anything like that. Same thing as the Juggernaut charge and Atal'Dazar. But the most common strategy is having a Havoc DH.
Yeah.
Stand nearest to it and time their blade dance or their blur so that they dodge the bleed entirely while your tank safely is out of range. And this is especially important on packs where there's also a Hex Priest casting their 200k magic damage spammable ability on the tank at the same time. When there's also a pack at the very beginning of that bridge where there's 2 Hex Priests, a Ties, and a Berserker, which is ridiculous for the tank to tank. Oftentimes you will screw up as a tank and get a second bleed. I still do. Everyone does it. And so have a backup plan for when you do that. As a Brewmaster, I roll away and just Zen Med through it. I scream at my party to help. Yeah, and usually something gets done.
Like if you get more than if you get a second stack more than once in a pull, or if you ever get a third stack, like you're gone. There's like that. It's not like there's a big way. The way to counterplay this is to not get those stacks outside of maybe having big defensives for one go through of it.
Yeah.
Also worth noting, engineering helmet, auto self cauterizer trait on it. You can try and high roll and have that proc while you got that bleed on you, and just remove it. That's
true. You can also intentionally press the dwarf racial.
Yes, stone form. That's very powerful against this too. Or blessing of protection.
Also, Dark Iron Dwarf. Shout out.
Yeah,
to
Fireblood. Fireblood.
Yeah.
Also,
shout out to Dratnos' race tier list.
Yep. Fireblood, a little bit less popular than Dwarf, but does the exact same thing. And yeah, blessing protection, bubble, those sorts of effects also do clear it. So. Worth being aware. And then, if you don't have a DH, you can have a rogue run up next to it and parry. You can have a mage run up next to it and ice block. Like, there are a lot of ways to have DPS soak this. Even just, a DPS soak it and then use their health pot, health stone, and defensive on it can help you get through it too, so...
Yeah, I was about to say that. It's actually, if no one else has a for sure way of dodging or immuning it, then just having a DPS tank it is often the better choice than the tank if they already have one stack or they're out of defensives. Because they're taking a lot of other damage at the same time, whereas the DPS is probably not unless they get frost shocked or something random.
Okay, Tettles, let's talk about the Spectral Brute. This is kind of an awful mob, right? It's kind of hard to pull anything with it. Why does nobody skip it?
Well, so basically you can only skip so much count inside of King's Rest, and in general, you'd have to pick like the Spectral Brute, or you'd have to pick like the 5-pack at the very end of the bridge. I think is probably part of the reason. Or you'd have to pick like the double Berserkers. And you can actually just do the Spectral Brute with the... What is it?
It's like a Witch Doctor Berserker.
Yeah, it's like the Witch Doctor... No, it's the pack that's after that with the double Raptors.
Double Spectral Raptor Beastmaster?
Yeah, the Beastmaster Double Spectral Raptor pack. You can actually just do the Brute with that. You can kill the Beastmaster, and then you grab the Brute with the double Raptors. The Raptors will like leap around and be kind of obnoxious, but it can be done with other mobs, whereas... It is very inefficient though, just because your melee have to get out every so often for the ground cast. But I don't know. There's just only so much that you can skip in KR, so groups elect to do that more often than not because it's not that dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with Undad here. You can tell Tettles is the range player because he doesn't hate this mob with a fiery passion.
The Raptors.
Yeah.
The Raptors are like the worst mob ever for the melee players. I don't find them that bad as a tank either, but I do understand that they one-shot if you get hit by any type of the cleave at all. The Brute is just so little count for the amount of time it takes to kill, and everyone would prefer to skip it if it wasn't on such a long patrol path through the bridge. Like it goes all the way across the entire bridge.
And every mob that it patrols next to. So if you're trying to fight the mobs that it patrols next to, what are you going to do? Sometimes it has a fixed patrol, like sometimes it gets stuck next to a Tide's Emissary. That can be useful, and it might be potentially skippable under those circumstances, but even then, it's so hard to actually skip it. because of how linear the dungeon is. There's not really a nice way of doing that. So
Well, the only alternative to be able to skip that is probably you could actually. So it's patrol. It starts whenever you activate all the trash on the bridge, and I haven't actually seen this done, but potentially you could use your shroud and then like chain it into like an invisibility potion and get to council room and then back pull and just not do the brute at all. But how worth is that realistically?
you would have to do the 5-pack as well, right? If that's strat, and that 5-pack is also pretty nasty.
Well, the 5-pack
we actually didn't have to. We chose to do the purification. We actually did the strat yesterday and won King's Rest, and we skipped the brute and the 5-pack and the Shadow of Azul all in one run, and that was pretty ideal. But you just can't guarantee where the brute is going to be because you have to pull all the other trash around the patrol. And so we did have to wait about 30 seconds for a patrol timer at one point, which if we were prepared for that option, then we could have skystepped to the boss, and that would have been like skystepped in Shroud to the boss. Skystep or Lightfoot is the
like
current potion.
You may as well just play the 5-pack, skip the tides with the Berserker and double Hex Priest and the Brute, and just do the 5-pack after.
Yeah, that may also be a good strat.
You can actually blow your CDs with what rotation is this week. I don't know. Anyways,
the final point on King's Rest we have is Shadow of Zul. And Shadow of Zul is something that may be fair to describe as an exploit. I don't know.
I don't know where you would ever come up with such a thing.
I don't know what you guys think about this one, but here's footage of David QZ. If anybody from Blizzard is looking for who to ban for this, David QZ is the character you're looking at over on Zul'jin. This is the culprit right here, officer. Here's how you do this. You get past Shadow Zul with the Shroud or whatever, and you double jump up to this thing, and then from there you can get over the gate in the middle, and you get to the last boss, and that skips Shadow of Zul, because then the last boss is active, and you can pull it and open the gate. So very, 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 very useful thing to do in these keys. Shadow of Zul massively overtuned, so try not to fight it. If you have a Demon Hunter in your group, then you can instead skip it, and that is what all of the top King's Rest runs are doing.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shadow Zul, like we said earlier, is worth the same count as the constructs at the beginning. And you can pull 4 constructs together, but you definitely could not pull 4 Shadow of Zuls together if that was possible. So you definitely want to skip that mob and save all your CDs for the last boss.
4 Shadow of Zuls? Dude, 4 Shadow of Zuls would be doable. Oh, can you spell reflect the Shadow Barrage?
Nope.
Okay, yeah. So no, it wouldn't.
Wasn't Shadow Zul teamed during
teaming Shadow Zul? Yeah, 2 Shadows of Zul.
I think it was for like one day on beta.
Yeah.
Can you imagine, man? Like actually having what the
teaming
fuck?
Shadows Zul, 2 Shadows.
Okay. This is the epitome of BFA balance here. They thought, man, Shadow of Zul is a really fair and okay mob. During teaming weeks, we may as well just make it 2. This seems really reasonable. Just like, what the fuck, bro?
Okay, it's worth noting that Shadow of Zul is weird. Also, it's weirdly coded. So if you do choose to engage it for some reason, it is a raid boss like mob. So it can parry if you're in the frontal arc of it, which is a fun thing. So don't be in the frontal arc of it. It's the only mob in M+ that behaves that way. Everything else is not. But they copied it from the raid encounter basically and bring it in and copied a lot of the mechanics coding. So it's a raid boss. It will parry you if you're in front of it.
That's true. And actually, a lot of people didn't know that you cannot be parried in Mythic Plus. That's the only mob currently in the game that can parry you in dungeons because of their level.
Mm-hmm. So that is definitely something to be aware of. Okay, let us go to Siege of Boralus. Siege of Boralus, the opening part, we have had a full episode actually on Siege of Boralus that you can go check out if you want to hear in depth on everything in here. But at the start of the dungeon, it's awful if you're Alliance. If you're Alliance, you have to deal with all kinds of awful enemies that we have not done. We've not done it, so we're not going to try and tell you how to do it. But remember, you can buy a faction transfer over to Horde and join us at any time, so that can help fix your problems there.
You want to know what a really good meme is? Did you know that on a 22, you actually get 100 to 0'd by the Raider hook?
Yeah, unfortified, right?
Literally 100 to 0, yeah.
Yeah, so do not... This is the one dungeon that's better to be Horde than Alliance. They also have random RP at the end of the dungeon, whereas the Horde does not.
Yes, it is.
After you kill the 3rd boss, just the gate blows up if you're a Horde, and if you're Alliance, they have a nice little conversation first. So that's
Yeah, they have an extra 30 seconds on their timer. It's true.
yeah,
Or time 30 seconds off
30
the timer.
seconds off the
Rather.
timer.
Also,
Yeah.
I just know when I watch my alliance friends do siege, once they make it past the first 3 poles, they're all just like, "Oh, we made it. We lived." Because of
Right.
the fire bombers and the hooks, and man, it's just rough.
Lactar bomber with their bombs.
Yeah, the firebomb thing. I've seen
cool.
I've seen one clip of that, and I was like, it's good to be a member of the Horde. I take back all the
Loktar.
things. Yeah, Loktar. Okay, let's talk about the enemies that the Horde does have to deal with at the start of the dungeon, which are Kultiran Footmen and Scrimshaw Gutters. I think are the main ones that are of big note to know how they work. Kultiran Footmen are enemies that do they do this like hindering cut on the tank or closest target, and they flee when they get low on health. So it can be pretty easy to get hindering cutted when they run away if they start coming back. So it's pretty important to kill these things as they run away, and then not have them start turning around and hindering cut your healer and kill them, because it does a lot of damage and it puts a huge haste debuff on the target. That's the Kultiran Footmen. They also have Scrimshaw Gutters that they are fighting. Tettles, what is a Scrimshaw Gutter, and why do we care?
It's an irrelevant mod that gives you 1 count if you tag it before you tag the footman. So
yeah, that's the
free
important
money.
thing, right? Is you need to tag these before they get RP killed by the footman as soon as the footman gets in combat with you. So you need to make sure that you tag the gutter first.
Also important to note the footmen flee once they drop below 30% health, so they can hinder and cut like ranged people or anybody.
Definitely.
It's what I normally tell people about those mobs. You don't really worry about the footmen and low keys up till about 15, because they'll just die before they flee too far away from the pack. They normally will just get killed by passive AoE. On higher keys on fortified, they'll start living and running away and then returning and coming back toward your healer in ranged. And if they do hit the healer in ranged, they're probably going to kill them on fortified. So you're as a tank, you want to go run over and like meet them halfway to intercept the bleed as they come running back in.
Oh, it's also important to note that Alliance actually has Marauders. They don't have Gutters and Footmen.
Yeah, Marauders are awful, right? They do that cursed strike that increases damage taken.
The fact that they also just give less count.
Yeah, because you have one friendly footman fighting a Marauder, right? And so you get 1 count for each of those combos instead of 2 counts.
Yeah, exactly. It's literally half as much count for the Footman Gutter combo. You just get 1 Marauder for every Footman Gutter combo, which makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, so you get way more count if you're Horde. Now, one other place where you get count as Horde is there are Scrimshaw Gutters across the canal after the first boss. This is a fun thing. So here you can see Tettles tagging some of these with Moonfire, but you can get free count from these just getting into combat with the Kultiran Footmen they're fighting, and the Scrimshaw Gutters can get killed from across the hall here. It's a nice little way to pick up some extra count. I did a Siege of Boralus yesterday where we needed these to make our count so that we didn't have to pull an extra pack of pirates later. So this is a useful way to pick up some extra count for sure. Okay. One other thing of note when you're in that spot where you fight these gutters is that there's a pull with a commander and 2 powder shots. What do you guys think about pulling this thing, the commander 2 powder shots? Charles, is this something that's in your routes these days, or do you generally skip it?
Yeah, we did last night on a 24 fortified, and I think it's the play. They give a lot of count for how little HP they have, but they're also very dangerous mobs. They'll constantly attack your DPS and your healer, and probably half health to one-shot them somewhere in that range on higher keys. And so you got to be really careful with stops on them. You can knock them, you can stun them, you can LOS their shots, but they do die fast. And so if you're ready for that moment, it's good. And I'd recommend staggering like 2 powder shots into the next pack rather than pulling them all at the same time.
Yeah, 3 or 4 powder shots at once is bad.
Pulling it into that corner pack that has the emissary there is going to be a no. We tried that and was not happening. It instantly killed somebody.
Yeah, because 2 hits from a powder shot will definitely kill you on a high key if they're back to back. Okay, next thing in Siege of Boralus, the next fun mechanic is Ashvane Spotters. Ashvane Spotters are a way to get count without doing damage, and they kill a bunch of stuff in the dungeon with their circles. So tell us, what is the strat with Ashvane Spotters generally?
You kill as much trash as you possibly can with them, but recently we've actually seen them killing less and less. We've actually seen. So previously we saw people go into the Monkey Town area and kill all the monkeys with the spotters. Now that seems like more of a strategy only for bolstering or raging, predominantly on raging.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now we actually see a lot of people skipping all of the Monkey Town because of those big what actually are those
Demolishers.
Ubermen? Yeah, the Demolishers,
Yeah,
whatever they are.
Demolishers.
Yeah.
Yeah, skipping that because the Demolishers actually just take so much time, and clearing them out is really annoying relative to the count that you actually are able to get from the spotters. So, but the spotters are utilized in a lot of places in front of the second boss on the marksman, killing all the Hadal trash. They're utilized there to be able to kill.
They don't kill commanders and they don't kill demolishers. They don't kill lieutenant mobs basically. So that can be.
They don't kill officers.
It's really notable on like bolstering. Bolstering can help with the spotters, right? Because it can turn the spotters up very big. But then you can accidentally bolster a commander to very big, and that can be bad because you can't kill it. So watch out for that. You need to plan for those. If you're gonna try and abuse a spotter on bolstering week, you need a plan for commanders. Mass root really useful for this, or like a DPS taunting a commander and running far away while you kill the rest of stuff with the spotter. There are a couple different ways to do it, but they're all tough. So it can be very fast, but also is not easy to do. Spotters also have a weird interaction with Tide's Emissaries, where Tide's Emissaries grant immunity to spotter damage to anything within their aura, but they themselves take damage from it. So
how that makes sense is
I'm not sure how that one makes
insane
sense.
to me.
I'm not sure. I think it's because it gives them like lieutenant status basically, and lieutenants are immune to the damage
Because they're immune to CC.
Yeah.
Because lieutenant mobs are
like
true.
I think it decides
shit.
whether or not to damage
That's
them
what it
based
is.
on whether they're CCable. Yeah. I don't make the rules. Like I do not make the rules.
Don't
But
flame bad enough, Swim Blizzard.
I try to explain them. So what it means is that generally, if the tides is next to dangerous stuff, you want to try and avoid pulling the tides with those pulls. For instance, in Hadal's room, when the tides is with that commander pack, you can pull like the farthest mob from the tides and not aggro the tides, and that can be really useful. Or you can use Ring of Pieces or whatever if you have those to avoid getting tides with your pulls that you're planning to kill with spotters. Because if you have to hit like 4 of your spotter shots extra on the tides before you can actually kill the invaders, your tank is going to die. Like there's not
your tank will take
you
literally
need to
double
kill
the amount
stuff
of damage.
fast. You need the first wave of spotter stuff to kill stuff, or else you're going to die on those pulls. So that is worth noting. Also worth noting, raging, very helpful for spotters because you can rage up the spotter and have it do double damage. So that's a good affix for
and
using
it's
spotters.
not going to have 10 billion health like bolstering.
Yeah, it's a good mid ground between bolstering and regular, I'd say. Okay, let's talk about build wrap pillagers. If you do choose to pull these enemies in the what Tattles is so lovingly called Monkey Town, you have the build wrap pillagers.
Do you think that's an appropriate
No, I
name
mean,
for that area?
It's a town.
Monkey Town.
There are monkeys in there. It's fair. The build wrap pillagers are some of those monkeys, and they do a frontal that. Trell, you have a lot of knowledge of how to deal with this viscous slobber, right? What's the strat for this thing?
The viscous slobber from the pillagers is definitely the most dangerous part for the tank and the rest of the party if they're not careful. You can either outrange it if you go really, really far. I think it's like 40 yards or something. So you don't want to do that, but that's the last resort. The frontal can be Z-axis, kind of like the tides can with other mobs around it. So if you're uphill from the mob, it just won't hit you.
Mm-hmm.
You can also stand directly inside of the mob's hitbox, and that'll immune it. It'll actually go past your character. There's several ways to deal with it, but the main thing you want to be aware of is when you actually get hit by the slobber, you can't use movement abilities. So if you're a brewmaster, you can't roll, which is kind of ridiculous. Because there's also usually a crusher or a demolisher, the big guy in the pool who's going to cast a fear and an AoE frontal, and so you got to dodge multiple things at the same time. So try to avoid the slobber, especially when the crusher's going to cast his fear.
Yeah, definitely. That combo can be very deadly for your tank. They can get feared and killed in that fear. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this last room of Siege of Boralus. When you're killing it, usually this is killed with spotter, but one thing that often is a problem in this room is the snipers, right? Snipers do a lot of damage to your group, and they'll stand far away and just murder your group while the rest of the stuff is getting killed by spotters. So I'd say that the biggest advice I have for dealing with this last room is making sure that the sniper gets knocked into the rest of the mobs, or lined into where the rest of the mobs are, and killed at the same time.
Ooh, also pulling Hadal will actually pull all the trash in the room, so don't accidentally pull him.
Do not do that. That is bad. There's also the invaders do a poison cast called Stinging Venom Coating. And if you do not have a poison dispel, a really useful thing to do is to try and stun them or gouge them or whatever on that cast. And then you will prevent your tank from getting a huge damaging poison stack on them 5 times. Outside of that, Tells, what are some useful things for like treants and stuff in this room?
Trees actually taunt everything except for the commanders inside of this room. So whenever you actually see a spotter artillery get dropped on top of them, you actually should just like trees them to make sure that they don't have to move, and then that way your tank can actually run away, or even take the commander and just solo tank that.
Yeah, very very useful strategy, because again, there's just a small amount of time that you need to keep them in the spotter circles, and then they're dead. So it's just kind of a sprint. Whenever you're pulling mobs in this last boss room, it's a sprint to the death from the like, you're trying to kill them with the spotter before they kill you with all their high damage abilities.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah, anything that can keep them still while the tank takes little to no damage is really, really good there. That's why treants are so optimal. Ring of Peace is really good for putting them exactly where you want them while also staying out of range. AoE stop, sweep, Chaos Nova, very important. Just do everything you can to keep the mobs in the circles.
All right, let's talk about Shrine of the Storm.
Hold on. Before we move on, Nerf and Fu want me to mention, did you know that you can actually bait Tidal Surge on Hadal to make it go in a specific way? The wave that crosses the room that clears the room?
No, how do you do this?
You have to move the boss at the very last second, right before the Tidal Surge comes out, and you can actually make it cross the room at a specific point.
I am skeptical.
Nah, dude. Nerf does it every single time.
Every single time?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
It's insane. I thought it was trap, and we thought it was some tinfoil hat theory, but eventually we got it to work yesterday.
That's absurd. That's very cool. Okay, let's move on to Shrine of the Storm though now. And one thing about Shrine of the Storm we have is in the early parts of the dungeon, there are a couple different ways to do this place. One thing is to snap mobs again. So there are ways to snap enemies in the first part of Shrine of the Storm. Here we have some footage of I have some footage of Trell doing a shrine, and you don't actually see him use the snap spots here, but I can show you where they are on this, which is these little cup things at the start of the dungeon. If you stand on here, mobs will snap to you unless they're casting. If they're casting, they'll just keep casting on you. But if they get interrupted, they'll immediately snap to their threat target if their threat target is on one of those cup things. So that can be a useful way to gather these things. But then you have to snap them back down, and again, they have to not be casting to move. So sometimes it's not worth doing this, using those little cup things, right?
Yeah, you got to be careful of the attendants. They always cast immediately when you engage them, so they do need to be kicked. The spiritualists will always snap because they have downtime in their casting queues.
Yeah, they don't start immediately.
So they'll just decide to melee you, and then they have to teleport to melees. I typically only use that brazier if I have 2 kicks lined up, or an assassination rogue. In my case, I usually have one that casts Garrote on both the casters, so they instantly come in, and you can solo that. Otherwise, I would LOS them up the stairs or somewhere else.
Yeah, so how do you like to pull the first part? Like, how many pulls do you like to do before Aquasur? Trell?
I think these days it's 4 total pulls. So you do the first room with all 14 initiates with the Templar. And even on bursting, that's okay. Most classes have a way to live 14 bursting stacks as long as they're all killed at the same time. Like, you don't want to roll 10, 11, 12, 13, and then finally 14. Then
that's lethal.
Everyone probably dies. Second pull, we usually pull like a spiritualist, the 2 attendants out on the middle crest up there with the enchanted emissary, and then the Templar that pats as well. And then one more pull in that area before the usual shroud is like the 2 attendants and the 2 spiritualists.
Yeah.
And then you do the shroud that you see everyone do past the living current. One more pull, and then the boss, typically.
Yeah, let me see if I can show you the shroud. Okay, yeah, so this works even with a Tide's emissary here. We have once this pack goes down, you just get into a shroud. Even if there's a Tide's emissary next to these 2 attendants, which there sometimes is, you can just run around the side, and you can get past this living current by just jumping and like hugging the right on the side here.
But you cannot go past that cup.
Yeah.
Trolls trying to walk into.
Yeah. And then you go into this pull here before
as long
boss. Yeah.
To be fair, as long as it's distracted, the living current, you should not pull it. Like, you can actually land pretty close to it and still not aggro as long as there's a good
Yeah, and you move quickly. Like, you can't hang out there, but it does work nicely. And then you have this pull of attendants, spiritualist, Templar, or whatever, which is handled much the same way. All right,
it's ruining your skip show.
Yeah, we'll cover that. We'll cover that again, I'm sure. Okay, let's talk about mini bosses in Shrine of the Storm. There are 3 major mini bosses that you have to deal with between the first and second bosses. The first is Windspeaker Heldis. Windspeaker Heldis is not often pulled. Sometimes there's a Void Emissary next to it, so you either have to do something really fancy or pull it. You can skip it still then.
Shadow Belt.
Yeah, or a rogue. I've done this where I tank the void facing a certain direction, and then the rest of the group
Dude,
runs by
okay,
on the
no,
other
no.
side.
Do
yeah,
not
that's
listen to this,
and
man.
then
I think
you
we talked about that.
and
That
then
is
you
the least reliable shit of all time. Do not listen
I
to
have a
them.
100% success rate with this strategy. 100%.
Of how many attempts? How
out
many?
of 1 attempt.
I mean,
Okay,
it is
shut
actually
up.
really reliable, but it's hard. The tank
Yeah.
has to taunt the void, and in that 3-second window where the void is forced to be turned a certain way, the group has to shroud past the behind. And it's actually far enough away that you can do it pretty consistently, but it is difficult.
You can do it without it. You can do it as a rogue. No tank needed. No tank getting in combat. No deaths strategy. It works. But one thing to be aware of is that Windspeaker Heldis does not have True Sight until she's been pulled. Once you pull her once, she will have True Sight for the rest of the run. So you will not be able. You can shroud past her, but you can't like pull her and reset her and then shroud past her. Then she will see you. So be aware of that.
That's the case with the Rune Carver mini boss as well.
Yes, both of those
they
mini
did
bosses behave
code-
that way.
They did code the bridge elemental correctly, and it does see stealth as it spawns. You don't have to pull them first.
Mhm.
The other two are still bugged.
Yep. So usually we'll skip all 3 of these mini bosses. That's kind of the meta, is to skip all 3 of them. Usually with like, if you have 2 rogues, you can just go Shroud, and then a Vanish skip. And we'll cover more exactly how to do these skips in our skip episode coming out in 2 weeks. But that's the meta for sure, is to skip these. But sometimes it's right to pull them. And one thing that you might want is if you need 4 extra count, you can pull the 4 initiates next to Windspeaker Heldis without pulling herself, right? This is like you can just run down and grab them from the right angle. They will not pull. Let me see if in this VOD actually there's a footage of somebody doing that, because it's a useful way to get a little bit of extra count, right?
Yeah, someone for sure did in that VOD, I think. But my camera might not have seen it. But you can either snap them to the brazier if you tag the correct mob, or you can just stand and let them path away from the Windspeaker and then carefully like inch them toward the boss.
Nice. Okay, so we can see it here. If you carefully observe the healer here, Fu, going down in a little raptor form, gets into cat form, and goes right on the little edge of the room there, and then you can see runs back, and the 4 initiates are following him, and Windspeaker Heldis is not pulled. And that is a really useful way to pick up 4 free count on this boss fight, and you don't have to actually fight Windspeaker Heldis if you do this. You can pull them without her.
What do you actually think about killing mini bosses inside of this dungeon?
I think it's probably less bad than, like, they're pulled a smaller percentage of the time than how bad they are. Like, I think that they are definitely pullable, and it's not catastrophic, but I don't know. I think it's often good to skip them. They have a lot of health, and, you know, it's hard to pull stuff on top of them often.
Yeah, if you can pull them with the boss, like on slightly lower keys than the cutting edge keys currently, it's livable to pull Windspeaker Heldis with the boss, Aquasuit, and probably consistently doable, but it's not like the case in the highest level keys where you can for sure live that, and so people will stop doing that. Like if you were able to do the 4-pack on the bridge with the Guardian Elemental, then that's also a really good pull, but it requires a ton of healing. So if you think you can do it, go for it. It's double the count of the normal pull there.
Yes, it's definitely a lot of count, but it's also a lot of danger. Then okay, we have some other pulls along the way to the next boss. One thing to note is that Tide Sage Initiates, even though they are very small in health, continue to apply on-death affixes.
Cool, bro. Very cool.
So, for instance, you might want to fight 24 Tide Sage Initiates at once, for instance, and on weeks such as Bursting Week, there's a minor problem that arises where 24 stacks of Bursting is a lot of stacks of Bursting. So try not to die to that. Other affixes that are fun with Tide Sage Initiates: Explosive, lots of explosive spawning. Bullstring, they still trigger Bullstring because that's non-death affix. Sanguine, they'll have a lot of blood everywhere. And Necrotic, they apply on a lot of Necrotic stacks. So careful of that. Be very careful.
Very sick. Love that.
Yep.
Why do they apply on death affixes? All right.
Yeah, we were all very hopeful about that being removed. They did a patch a long time ago where they were like, we're removing small mobs causing these on-death affixes. And then they only actually changed like 2 mob types, I think. Like
Maggots and Waycrest. Yeah.
And the maggots, yeah.
Animated droplets, those were big changes, but they have not fixed Minions Azul or Tide Sage Initiates. Those are the 2 worst ones that are left in the game. Okay. Now, after the second boss dies, generally, again, we'll skip most of the trash after the second boss. So we're talking about Ritualists, Enforcers, a couple Depth Bringers, that kind of stuff. Usually, this is the point in a dungeon where there's a nice big skippy skip, done, death skip. And we'll talk about how exactly to execute this death skip on our skips episode, probably. But for now, we'll just say often this is skipped. Sometimes you can fight Ritualist if you want, but it's pretty slow count. It's easy count, but it's slow count. And so we don't generally pull these in higher keys because it's just not. You'll have to do more pulls throughout the dungeon if you do pull these. If you're in a lower key, it's totally fine to pull them. It's a very easy pull, right? The Ritualist and 3 skeletons or whatever. No risk of dying. Just also no, 10 count for a minute is not a good exchange. Okay.
Yeah, the trade-off is like you get 10 count for killing a Ritualist with 10 million health, or you can get 36 count for killing 4 mobs for like 40 seconds. You know, it's just like the clear choice is the 4 mobs.
Yeah, it sucks because it's a much easier pull to do, and it turns on the skip to get back if you wipe, but that still is not good enough to make wiping not an instant, deplete. So
no, wipes an instant deplete. That is not great.
Yeah,
you wipe and trying, you're upset.
If anybody would like to see MDI finals footage, you can see what happens after you wipe in Shrine of the Storm on the on the bridge. That's like a 5-minute loss right there, and that's how that ends some MDI aspirations.
Who wipes in Shrine?
True.
Says Nerf Tank TV and Jet.
Yeah. Okay, so
Tank of Method NA.
Speaking of the pull where Method NA famously wiped in Shrine of the Storm in the grand finals of the MDI at BlizzCon, that is the tentacle pull, right? So we have 2 tentacles and 2 abyssal cultists, right? What is this pull trail? Why do we do it? What's worth about it?
This pull's actually like just primarily tank damage. I don't know if there's any group damage. Is there?
No, there's no group damage unless you add in some Depthbringers, which did happen to Method NA in the finals of the BlizzCon MDI where they wiped.
Shut up! Oh my god!
Poor Method NA, man. That was heartbreaking. They were so far ahead. But that pack is actually pretty simple as long as everyone observes the mechanics. You got to dodge the 2 frontals that the cultists do that they do in a straight line on the tank. But you can sidestep it at the very end or whenever you want. You can stun it and have them recast. The tentacles do need to be. They require the tank to be in between the tentacles for the entire fight. If you ever step back or away from them to drop necrotic, for instance, then they will slam and AoE the whole group and probably kill everyone.
Yeah.
So as long as you observe that and use defensives, it's probably okay.
This is a Void Emissary problem. When there's a Void Emissary in the middle of this pull, you are on a tight time limit because you cannot. Your tank cannot line that Void cast, and if that 3rd one goes off, it's over, right? So we do try to avoid that. Yeah.
That's the same kind of hypocritical mechanic that I don't like about BFA, where they require you to not kite, but they also require you to run away. Like, for instance, when the Void is there, you have nowhere to go, but you have to stay there.
Okay. Outside of that, after the tentacle pack, we have the other 2 pulls. We have the other 2 pulls on the bridge. So there's one pull that's 1 cultist, 3 Depthbringers, and one pull that's 1 Depthbringer, 3 cultists. Which of these pulls do you like to pull, Tettles, and which ones do you like to skip?
Pull them both at the same time.
You can pull them. You can pull them together. Yeah, you can fight 4 cultists, 4 Depthbringer. That's a legal pull.
Generally, you want to pull the least amount of Depthbringers possible because they will cast on random targets with their bolt, and if you pull too many of them, you just won't have enough kicks available. So you'll generally pull the pack with a 1 Depthbringer. However, the 2 Depthbringer pull is actually doable if you do have enough kicks.
Yeah, I think the fighting a lot of Depthbringers is actually okay, but it is spooky. So it's
when you're looking at the bridge as you cross it for like after you kill that big tentacle pack, you're looking down the bridge. You always want to pull the left patrol pack because that's the easier one. If you have a choice between the 2, always go for the left one.
Yeah, you might want to do both, but if you're only doing one, the left one is the easier one. Okay, then we get the tentacle packs in Lord Stormsong's room. There are a couple of different strategies here. My favorite new one is actually engaging both at the same time and then killing them all with the staff proc. So if you have somebody in your group using a Jara staff, this is a great way you can handle 2 pretty difficult pulls just immediately. Just make sure you're in combat with both of them and then all gone.
So you've been running with the mage lately, I see.
I think it was you, Tettles, that was I maybe was running with for this. Maybe not. Maybe it was a mage, yeah.
It's almost impossible to live through that just because of void placements most weeks. There is I think it's
okay.
I think it's on either it's either on Ties or Void Week where the void is placed in a way that you can actually live the whole entire time during the skip. but a lot of the times you'll just get killed during the skip.
Right. So,
you
yeah,
actually
if you have died or
staff
death
earlier.
skipped earlier, then your staff is gone. But if you're playing with a mage, yeah, they can invis. So I must have been playing with a mage then who did this, and you just pulled both packs and all gone.
Yeah, that would be optimal, but not really viable for a lot of groups unless you have Shadow Meld.
Alliance groups. Yeah, alliance groups can just Shadow Meld on druids or Shadow Priests or whatever as well and do it. Then if you're not going to do that, your other options are to pull Tentacle Pack, Boss, or Tentacle Pass, Boss, Tentacle Pack. Those two orders. I'd say generally the safer one is to kill the boss first and then get the graveyard and then go kill the other one, but that's a little slower, right? Because you have to backtrack a little bit. And so you may instead be interested in killing the 2 Tentacle Packs before engaging the boss, but then you don't probably have big cooldowns for both of them. They can do a lot of damage, so you got to be careful.
Quick note, if there's any tides inside of these tentacle packs, you can also put the tides like on these like benches, and that'll z-axis them to where the tentacles are all interrupted or stunnable or whatever. Very,
very useful thing to do. Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely the play. You want to use all the CC you have on those tentacles. You want to have AoE burst damage, and you also want to use your defenses. Probably the whole group wants to use their defenses because you don't really need it for the boss after. It become like a big deal in high keys on Fortified especially, whereas in lower keys you just kind of kill the tentacles passively without worrying too much about it.
All right, that is about does it for the trash in Shrine of the Storm. The last boss trash room is basically part of the boss fight, so we covered it last week when we talked about how to do Vol'Zith. So if you're interested in learning about how to do all that trash in that last boss room, we recommend doing it with the boss, and you can watch last week's show or listen to it to hear about how to handle the Vol'Zith trash. But that does it for the first 5 dungeons of our trash show. We'll cover the next 5 next week, but now let's move on to a quick Q&A segment before we get back to key pushing. So our first Q&A comes from @Andres_KRF, who asks, I struggle to heal 3rd boss in King's Rest when the Axe Girl put the dot on a random party member, and I have to avoid axes and heal over it. Any advice? Tettles, what's your advice here for healing Severing Axe?
So we're actually saving some of this from last week's too, because our show ran really long last week, so we needed to cut it a little bit shorter. So we're just going to do all of the QA at once. Basically, so for Cool of the Butcher, you can either dodge or parry the axe on her. So using Blade Dance, Riposte. You can also die by the Sword It. That's also fairly important. We actually see groups, they'll like position people relative around the room. She actually turns her head before she throws the axe at them, so you can actually parry that. Or you can taunt Kula right before she does it, and then she will use target of target and show you who's going to be have the Severing Axe thrown on her. Beyond that, for healing, a lot of the times you can actually get away with using like your personal defensives into a healer external for 1. If you get 2 in a row, I would recommend just having battle reses.
Yeah, I think just not trying to heal through it and trying to use battle reses, like the way to handle it is to not have that, like to have somebody dodge getting hit, and it's in a high key. There's just not a good way to, get healed through that. It's just so much damage.
Yeah, for a druid specifically, if you get 1 on you as a druid, you can go Barkskin into Ironbark, and you can probably be okay. If you get a second one on you, you're just like, all right, battle res me, I'm dying.
Yeah, once it goes on somebody who has no defensives, and also like healer externals get exhausted pretty quick, so it's dangerous time. Okay, next question comes from Suproa in Discord. Atal and Shrine, are snaps worth it in all key levels, and at what point do they become worth it? Trell, what do you think about snapping?
I think snapping is definitely required in Atal, probably past 15 at some level of the snap. Like the Sarge, you should probably always the Confessor, Augur, Juggernaut pulls. You don't have to necessarily snap. You can just have a ranged bait it, and they'll probably live up till about like 23, 24. Whereas then you need to make sure that it's fully going to be immune, or you have some easy way to deal with it without the ranged player dying. Shrine, I don't know if you really need to snap anything. That's just for quality of life, speeding up the pull.
Yeah, Shrine is definitely not necessary. I'd say for swords and Atal, it becomes necessary at the lowest key levels. And then at higher key levels, then the snap spots for Juggernauts also start to become really helpful. And I think it's never really necessary in Shrine. I think it's definitely worth practicing though as a tank. Like if you can, like you should go into a Mythic 0 and practice the jump until you can get it every time. Because it's just like even if you would choose not to do it for some week for some reason, it's worth knowing how to do it. It's really useful. Okay.
Yeah, I think I was pretty scared of that jump for a while, and then eventually I just got the feel of it, and you know exactly where your character's going to land if you jump at a certain point on that little list. If you have any kind of speed boost, it's still really scary. I kind of have to calculate in my head how far my character is going to jump. If I have like the speed boost from Chi Torpedo, for example, it's really scary, or a Sky Step on.
Yeah,
but you get used to it.
I mean, I've fallen off this thing in the past month trying to get to snap spots before, so it can still happen. But you want to practice it to the point where that does not happen very often. Okay, QBs in Discord asks about the Sand Queen. How do you dodge upheaval without using an immunity or a DR of some kind? What are the different strats here, Tettles?
All right, so you can either like Shadow Meld or Vanish it. That will make it spawn where it originally did its upheaval
and do no damage.
It does no damage, yeah, and it does no damage. So that is one way of doing it. Of course, you can use magic immunities such as Cloak. AMS is like a really big shield. I wouldn't consider that immunity, but you can.
It's enough usually, yeah.
You can use immunities such as Ice Block or Cloak. That's also really nice, but it does say no immunity or DR in this. So the third one is using mobility CDs to be able to dodge it, like Blink, Wild Charge, Transcendence, Chi Torpedo,
Warlock Gateway,
grapple,
Shadow Step.
Grapple, Shadow Step, stuff like that.
Pretty much anything works that moves you quick enough. Life Grip works as well. Yeah, Priest can Life Grip you if you don't have one. Stuff like Goblin Jump isn't fast enough. You need something that actually moves you pretty quickly. And
Bull Rush.
Bull Rush. There's this Weaker I've just put in chat and is in the show notes at the bottom here that will put a bar on your screen with upheaval. Depending on which ability you're going to use, you need to move at a different time. So learn what time that is for the ability you're using, and then press your button at that time. Some of them are more or less precise, but yeah, it's a way to do it. If you want to Shadow Step or charge or whatever, and you don't want to do it to a friendly, one thing that might be of interest to you is a Racing Flag. Racing Flags are very useful for a couple different specs, and also for anybody using the Aquapotent Nautilus trinket. It's a very useful little thing to do, and you can put down a Racing Flag and then charge to it or Shadow Step to it right as when you need to, and then you're not risking mistiming it and killing another person with your sins there. So would recommend this. Again, it's a Mist of Pandaria item. You just get it from the Order of the Cloud Serpent. It takes like a day of dailies to get to Revered, and then you're chilling, and you can buy a bunch of these and drop them and charge them or whatever.
I got it in 2 hours this week. It literally took me no time.
Yeah.
It's also, I don't know if we mentioned already, but you should definitely run far away from the boss before she casts the actual ability at you. So as you see the upheaval going out and you know it's on you, you run away from her to cause as much distance between you and the boss to dodge the projectile as possible, because you can actually see her hitbox move toward you underground, and you just have to dodge during that moment. So if you transcend right as her hitbox zooms toward you, or you blink, or you Chi Torpedo, or whatever you want to do, then you're probably going to dodge it if you time it right. But you do have to be far away.
All right, our next question comes from @Calipunkin456, who asks, any tips regarding pulling extra mobs into bosses, when to do it and when not to? I think that the general heuristic this season is just to generally not do it. In BFA, most dungeons, there are a couple of bosses where you will pull trash onto them, like Aquasur and Shrine of the Storm is a pretty common one to do, and actually second boss in Shrine of the Storm as well, once it's down to one target. You'll also pull trash onto, but I think most bosses usually safest to not pull anything onto them, or maybe one emissary if it's in the room and you were able to skip it. Tettles, do you have any tips on this also?
I think it's like boss by boss. There's some bosses that are really easy to pull trash into. Like Priestess Alunza, you could probably pull trash into her because damage on her doesn't really matter too much. If you really wanted to, you could pull like the Juggernaut and the Augur into it. It's probably fine as long as you have somebody who can live the Juggernaut charge.
Yeah, we used to pull a big trash pull onto her, but since they buffed her damage and Reaping went away, it became a little bit less feasible.
Yeah, but I mean, it just really kind of depends boss to boss. There's a lot of different stuff that you can do.
And affixes, of course, matter too, right? Bolstering, necrotic, all sanguine, all sorts of things make you less interested in pulling stuff onto bosses often.
Relative positioning of trash to bosses too. Once you actually start going higher, though, in terms of key level, it becomes less and less viable for you to be looking to pull trash into the bosses, just because the relative damage intake of tanks does not scale that well. So your tank is actually just getting, like, anything past like a 21 or 22, your tank is actually just getting rolled the whole entire dungeon. So pulling trash into him may not be the best move.
Yeah, especially like Brewmasters, when you double the incoming damage on a Brewmaster, you more than double the damage they take because they dodge a smaller percentage of it as well.
Yeah.
So
Less likely to dodge the important single target melees from the boss.
Yeah.
It's tough. A lot of BFA trash packs are very far away from the bosses for some reason. Like, if you take King's Rest, for example, you have to like clear the entire room and then you finally engage the boss. And there's no possible way you can pull trash with it because everything's dead that required you to spawn the boss. And then there's also a gate to the next area.
Yeah. So hard to pull trash on the bosses for sure.
Yeah.
But then you have Jess Howless, where you can actually pull like Raiders and shit into it. That Raiders are just melee the tank, like don't really do anything. Jess is like a pretty low damage intake fight.
Yeah, and you're gonna have to fight the Raiders anyway during the boss fight, so may as well.
Exactly. Well, if you spawn them beforehand, you actually get the count for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if you kill it during, but if he opens up the cage, then you don't get the count for it.
Yep. So it's
true.
worth pulling them first into Jess rather than having Jess open the cages.
They're very awkward mobs because they depend on the affixes a lot. Like, they will bolster if you pull them first and then the boss. But if you pull the boss without them, then they won't bolster.
Right.
They'll apply necrotic either way. They'll drop sanguine only if you pull them before the boss. They won't drop sanguine if you pull them after the boss.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Just gotta keep it in mind.
They also don't give count. So
yeah, they only give count if you pull them before the boss. Yeah.
True. Yeah.
From Sane Tweet here, we have in Siege of Boralus. When would you consider it necessary to drag a spotter around? I think bolstering week is the week where it's most like spotter abusey. Yeah. I think raging is also good. Like those weeks are ones where you want to use it more. Outside of that, yeah, the meta has kind of shifted away from using it to get more than like 20% count. I think that's because it's just fiddly to do so, and you don't need to do it to time the key. And it introduces an extra point of failure into the key. But yeah, the higher the key, the more interested you're going to be in doing this. And if any of those affixes are active that buff up the spotter, you'll also want to do it.
I would say that it is necessary to use it for
the last boss room. Yeah,
for Hadal's trash, and for if you're back pulling any of the monkeys. Like there's that 6-pack of Pillager Buccaneers,
which is sometimes just a 3-pack. Sometimes just a 3-pack if the world quest is active. This is such a funny story, man. They had this 3-pack that didn't spawn whenever there was a world quest active. So their solution was to just add that 3-pack in, regardless of whether there's a world quest active. Yeah, so it's just duplicated. So on most weeks now, there are just 6 mobs there, just 2, like each of them is stacked right on top of another copy of themselves. And then on World Quest week, there's only 1 pack, and it's like it's supposed to be. It's so silly, but
it's just a funny fix because the entire issue was that the count was not consistent because sometimes 12 count was just missing there, and then they made
still true,
just as inconsistent. They just added an option where there's double the mobs sometimes.
Yeah, so a great fix there. Anyways, that gets us through our Q&A section here. Again, a little bit shorter than last week's episode, although this was actually still a fairly long episode. So you're welcome, everybody. Happy to provide the content for you.
You're welcome, everybody. Yeah. All right, yeah. Anyways, next week we're gonna have the rest of the dungeons, which I think is like Atal'Dazar, Underrot. What else?
Atal'Dazar, Underrot, Temple of Sethralis. We did. Are there other dungeons? Motherload. Then one more. There's one more.
Freehold.
Nice. Yeah.
Yes.
So those 5 will be next week. We hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, let us know what you think. If you did enjoy it, an iTunes review would be a very helpful thing that we would very much appreciate. And of course, you could consider supporting us at patreon.com/Titanforge. We really do appreciate everybody who's chosen to do that in the past week. It's really, really, really generous and very, very helpful for us doing this show every week. What causes us to choose to do it instead of pushing keys during these 2 hours of our lives. But it is now time for us to go push keys. So thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Peace.
Made it.